Okay, I would like to call the Planning Commission work session to order for Thursday, April 17th, 2025. My name is Carl Johnson. I'm the chairman of the Clark County Planning Commission. Before we begin tonight, I would like to announce that our web Planning Commission work sessions are hybrid, both in person and via WebEx. For the virtual and in-person members of the Planning Commission and staff, please ensure that your microphones are turned off or muted unless you are speaking. There will not be any public comment during this work session, but members of the public can watch or listen. This evening's agenda is as follows. Biannual code amendments through Brent Davis. Brent is here. And then there'll be some comments for the Planning Commission. And then we'll adjourn to come back for our 6:30 hearing. If there's not any questions, all right, we will move on. With that, we want to get a roll call or not? We don't need a roll call, do we? Okay. So, Brent, you're up, it looks like.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Brent Davis. I'm the Land Use Review Manager in the Department of Community Development. What I have for you tonight is what we call our biannual code updates. It's kind of a misnomer these days. We do them as needed. Initially, when this program was started, it was done twice a year because there was a lot of things to update. And as we've moved through time, we have fewer and fewer items, so they get spread out. Next slide, please. So just by way of background, we periodically batch minor code amendments that come to us through the outside community, through staff identifying things while they're doing their daily work. We also reach out to the Development Engineering Advisory Board for recommendations. And then we take all those items that we get, we look at them with our management team and determine which ones we think we can carry forward through this process. And then we batch them in a few categories. The first one is correction of Scrivener's errors and some minor tweaks. Then updating references, which we also generally put things like change to comply with new state statute or something like that. Clarifying of standards where we find language that is unclear or ambiguous. And then we also have minor policy changes that we propose, and we generally, before we come to you, we have a work session with the council to see if they have any concerns about any of those and want to elevate them to a more, I guess, individualized code amendment process. So when we go to hearing, and you'll see the SEPA documents in the package for the hearing, and just be aware there are a couple amendments that'll be in that package that I'm not presenting to you tonight because they are not amendments to Title 40, which is the development code. Per the Growth Management Act, development code amendments have to go through Planning Commission. And so those are the amendments that you'll be seeing tonight, but you'll see a few more in the SEPA package when we come back for hearing. Next slide, please. So just by way of process, as I mentioned, we gather proposed amendments. And then once we get our list together, we prepare preliminary drafts, which is the document that you have before you. We had a work session with council on the 19th of February to go through these items. And we didn't remove any through that process. We did actually add an item or two at their recommendation. I've filed the 60-day notice of intent with Commerce last week. So our council hearing is scheduled for the 1st of July at this point. So we'll be good on the 60-day requirement there. And then we're here tonight for a work session. And after the completion of this, between now and the hearing, I'll be having the draft ordinance to legal counsel for a legal review. We'll get the SEPA documentation out, and then we'll be back here on the 15th of May for the public hearing for these proposed amendments. And then, as I mentioned, the council hearing is scheduled for July 1st. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through each amendment item by item. I'm just going to give you a summary of what the items are. And then if you have any questions about the details, we can dive into those after. I do want to mention earlier today, a memo was added to the documents. I got confused on my versions of this document. I thought an item was missing. And then after I sent it to Jeff and he got it published and sent to you, I realized that the version that was actually provided to you included it. So that memo is actually redundant and you can ignore it. The item is in the other packet. All right. In terms of non-policy changes, we have a proposal to remove some language in our type 2 and type 3 timeline procedures. What happened is we have new state statute regarding timelines. And one of the things that statute does is says when we can start and stop the review clock. And our code currently says that when we ask an applicant for additional information, we can add 14 days to the review clock after they submit that information to take time to review it to see if it's actually it addresses what we asked for. And the state statute doesn't allow it, the new state statute doesn't allow us to do that. It says we have to start the clock as soon as they submit the new information. So we're proposing to remove those provisions from our procedures. The next item is the time limit for expenditure of impact fee revenue. The current code says the county has 6 years to spend that revenue. This is primarily traffic impact fees and road fund. But state statute was changed in 2011 to allow 10 years. And so we're proposing to update our code so that Public Works has a full 10 years to use those funds. There's a series of amendments to align the urban ADU standards with new state statute. There are some items in the state statute that we are prohibited from doing that our code does. Namely, we currently restrict ADUs to single family detached dwellings, and state statute says that any single family housing, we cannot prohibit an ADU for any single family housing type. And then we're also required to allow up to 2 ADUs per lot in any zoning district that allows single family residences. And so we're proposing to add ADUs to the use tables in the residential and office residential zones, which are multifamily zones, because those zones do allow for existing single family residences and we're required by state statute to allow ADUs for those existing residences. Similarly, we are adding ADUs as a permitted use in the urban holding district for the same reason. And then there's also a change. It's a mix of a clarification and a alignment with state law. It wasn't clear in our current standards whether you could have two detached ADUs, and state statute says we have to allow 2 detached ADUs. In addition to that, the state statute also says we cannot impose any setback or design standards to an ADU that we do not impose on the primary residence. And we had some standards about setbacks and which direction your front facade could face and that sort of stuff. And so we're removing that from the ADU code. Next item, in the low density districts, the language regarding how many townhome units you can have in a structure was not clear. Implied that you, in any development, you were only allowed to have 4 townhomes, up to 4 townhomes without a planned unit development. And what the intent of the code was is that you couldn't have more than 4 townhomes in a single structure. So if you want 5 attached homes, you still have to go through a planned unit development. But if you limit your attached units to 4 units per structure, you will not need to do a planned unit development. And that keeps the structures and the sizing of the lots consistent with the other housing types and the density. It all works with the math. Last non-policy change, we're making a clarification to the school impact fee calculation standards. This is a request that we got from the school districts. There are 2 main things. One is to allow the responsible official to approve alternate calculation methodologies for one element of the formula, which is called the student factor. And part of that is because the language in the current code is not clear. It tells you how to do a calculation, but then it says that you have to do separate calculations for single family and multifamily, but the methodology basically tells you to average all your housing types into one. So, and some districts have been wanting to use alternate methodologies to take into account different types of multifamily housing that may have, more or less children, school-age children. So if their district has a lot of new multifamily, but a big proportion of it is senior housing, they didn't want to count that the same as regular multifamily housing. And then also the code says they're supposed to recalculate that student factor annually. And in practice, the districts are not updating their impact fee calculations annually. So we're just removing that requirement. Next slide, please. Minor policy changes. We are adding some very simple standards for light and glare in the rural districts. This is a request that we had from council. And so the language that we're proposing would apply to new development. It would not apply to existing development. And it's just very simple language about, not directing bright lights towards outward from the site and that sort of thing. We're also proposing an update to the Forest Practices Code. This is the most substantial change in this package. We do have staff from Public Works here tonight, the forestry staff, if you have questions about that. And then with our new middle housing standards, we have more housing types that are triggering guest parking requirements. And when that guest parking is in the public right-of-way or adjacent to it, we've seen a few cases where developers were proposing to put head-in parking immediately adjacent and connected to the right-of-way, and which we don't necessarily have a problem with in concept, but the issue that we're running into is some of them were proposing that the sidewalks continue straight in alignment with the right-of-way. So we would have a situation where we have head-in parking with sidewalk behind the cars and people trying to make movements in and out of that parking with potential for pedestrians to be in their way. So we're just putting in some language to when that's proposed, that the sidewalk needs to essentially wrap around the parking and maintain a safe pathway for the pedestrians. Oh, thank you. Sorry, I missed the temporary hardship allowance. So in our temporary hardship code, it's historically required a manufactured home to be used for temporary hardship. This is a code that allows for temporary addition of a second dwelling to a rural lot for a hardship purpose, like a family member that needs care. There are a few other criteria. And there is a rather, I guess, specific provision in certain circumstances where a permanent structure could be used. It's very limiting. What we've been running into more and more is situations where people have an existing residence, they're building a new home in a different location on the property, and they have a hardship need, and they want to use their old home for their hardship. And technically, the code doesn't allow that. We're proposing to add a provision that would allow that, provided they record a covenant that states that when the hardship is over, that they will decommission that second residence into either by demolishing it or converting it to a non-dwelling structure. Okay, so I think the next couple slides are regarding the forest practice code updates. So Kevin Tyler and Hunter Decker from Public Works are here to present that.
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Kevin Tyler, and I work for Clark County Public Works, and with me is Hunter Decker, the county forester. And so just to kind of give you a high-level background, Hunter started with us in 2016, and as a transition from the county forester that had been here for a decade or more. And Hunter started reviewing the code. We were reviewing the code together, and identifying ways that it needed to be updated to be consistent with state law and with county code, county critical areas ordinances. So we've been working on this for a couple of years now, and finally getting into the biannual code change process with community development. And the primary intent is to make sure that that it's consistent with the state code for forest practices, which is RCW 7609, and then also with the Washington Administrative Code, Chapter 222. And then beyond that, make sure there's no inconsistencies with the way the county code is written in other sections like critical areas. So one of the big things that we focused on were clarifying and developing provisions for what we call Class 1 non-exempt permits. Class 1 permits are small permits. Class 2, Class 3, Class 4 is kind of the hierarchy in the forest practice world. And the code lacked provisions for how Class 1s would be administered in the county, and there were also some inconsistencies with the way that it's intended to be interpreted and enacted across the county. Some other things that we worked on were making sure that there's a clear list of exemptions in the code. So when you don't need a forest practice permit. And then, as I mentioned, the consistency with the county critical areas ordinances, making updates to reference Shoreline Management Act and recent updates to the county's wetland and habitat review ordinance. And then I think those are the big ones. Hunter, was there anything that you wanted to add?
Yep. Goodness gracious.
Hi, Hunter Decker, County Forester for Public Works. Yeah, part of this work was going through the original 1998 three-ring binder of all the planning meetings, getting an idea of even, how they were trying to interpret the code, because I had kind of a short-term internship with my predecessor. He passed away right before we had the 2-year turnaround, so we had about 8 months, so we didn't quite get through it all. But looking at other counties too, how they process their forest practice applications, looking at ours, trying to make it all make sense of it, and come to find out there is some disparities that, looking at how we defined our Class 1s have changed from what state law. So let's just go with what the state has and, cross out those definitions that aren't, up to code anymore. Yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to say.
There was another slide, right? And I think it's mostly what we just already talked about. Yeah. So we're here to answer any questions that you might have about forest practices in general or about the code changes.
So this is Eldon. So can you give me an example of a class 1 forest practice permit? What I need some education.
Yeah. So you want to take this one? He's the expert.
So a class 1 is properties that are 2-acre forested properties that are 2 acres or less, that you're going to harvest or convert to another use. Those would be considered class 1s. There's others in the state definition, like harvesting more than 5,000 board feet for personal use in a given year would require a class 1. If you're doing Christmas tree harvesting, I think is another one that would require class 1, but we would exempt that in our list of exemptions because it's more of a farm and ag thing. And honestly, all the other counties do that as well. And so anything that's larger than a 2-acre harvest would be considered like a class 2 or a class 3. And then the class 4 generals are any application that would be converting forest land to another use as well. And those go through a more substantial review, which is a type 2 process through land use, which the SEPA and archaeological predetermination sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Haroon. So I'm pretty ignorant on the forest practices code. How are we making it better? Are we making it better? Are we making it more expensive, more cumbersome, less cumbersome? Is it going to be much more clear to whomever wants to log or develop? Are we making this like? I'm guess trying to get like what is the problem that we're solving here?
Yeah, I think
And-
there's a couple of things that we're trying to solve here. One is to make sure that it's consistent with state law. So we don't want to have a code that goes against state law. And 2, we want to make sure that it's clear what our jurisdiction is versus the state's. So Hunter mentioned class 2 and class 3 permits. Those are permits that are issued by the state. The state does forest practice permitting. Generally, it's like outside the urban growth area. The county does forest practice permitting inside the urban growth area and outside when it's a conversion. So the state, if somebody's going to harvest trees on their property and then build a home, that's converting it from commercial forestry to residential development, even if it's just a single family residence. The state will, if you go to the state and say you want to do that, they will refer you back to the county to make sure that we process the permit accordingly. So those are the 2 things, is just clarify jurisdiction for everybody, and then make sure that we're not doing anything that's against state law. And the county code provisions in other chapters are also, part of that process. Yeah.
I have a follow on to that. Have you had any problems in the last 10 years as it relates to anything that you mentioned? Have it lawsuits or anything that's come up or?
We have problems with what's called a backdoor conversion. So that would be somebody comes to the state and gets a permit for a class 3 and harvests, their 10-acre property, and then there's a moratorium on the property, right? And then they'll come to us and try to build a home on the property, right? So you kind of circumvent that process of going through what's called through the county's process, right? So those backdoor conversions where they're allowed to harvest closer to streams than county critical area ordinances allow. So by going through the class 4 general, the conversion process with the county, all of the county ordinances are maintained and those protections for critical areas are in place. So that's kind of that's the problem that happens on a pretty regular basis. Backdoor. That's what we call them. I don't, that's not a technical term. Yeah. Thank you.
So just to clarify for like on the stream thing, there is a disconnect between, I guess, the county values as far as setback is concerned around a stream and the state values around setback on that. And then there's an actual policy like, because isn't my understanding like stream setbacks like are typically set via state law. So is there a break in the state law between logging practices and then development?
Yeah.
Well,
No, I'm ready for this one. No. So, there's two different kinds of subsets. We have forest practice rules, which is after you're done harvesting, you're required to replant. And then the county puts a 6-year development moratorium on those applications because they're required to replant. We were having issues where folks were just coming in right afterwards, and our code had said some things that it was supposed to be interpreted where we weren't supposed to be processing any land use applications at the same time as a development moratorium case, and that was going on. There was issues where I wasn't getting routed class 1 reviews that should have been routed in the past. That's all changed now. We've made it more efficient. But with those stream rules and the buffers, I'll give you a prime example. Folks that have less than 20 acres, there's in forest practice rules and exemptions where fish-bearing streams could have a buffer of 29 feet. But you're required to replant, right? But then, so that happens, right? Happens all the time. Well, maybe a death in the family or something happens and they have to sell their property and the new owners want to do a different use on it. Well, they want to build a home on it instead. So the county does have a moratorium process for a single family residence waiver. If there's not an existing residence, to waive up to 2 acres of the replanting requirement. To put your home site, say it's a 5-acre parcel. So the remaining 3 acres that was harvested would have to be replanted back to our critical area ordinance standards. So the state requires 190 trees per acre on the west side of the Cascades. So that's about a 15 by 15 foot spacing. We've been requiring about 300 trees per acre in those critical areas. So, 12 by 12 foot spacing. With larger parcels, buffers are different depending on the stream lengths. Private landowners have different rules than the state. The state has a habitat conservation plan on top of forest practice rules. So that's more limitations. That's why you see like leave tree islands and stuff on state land, and maybe like private land there is none because you don't have to do that necessarily. You could leave the trees more in the buffer in the riparian areas. Is there anything else that I missed there? Okay.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one more thing about the class 1 non-exempt forest practices. So the provisions for how those are approved and processed were essentially absent from the code. So that was another, and I don't know if I clarified that very well, but that's one of the major things that we're doing with the code is making sure that there are those provisions for how those are processed. So I just wanted to add that.
Any more questions? Okay, I guess we're back to you, Grant. Are you done?
Yes, I'm done, unless there are any questions about any of the other amendments.
I know we had some other questions or yes. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I have one for you, Brent. You had a time limit for expenditure of impact fee that you're going to go from 6 years to 10 years?
Yes.
Well, is that just because the state law says 10 years? Or, I'm a developer, I'm paying impact fees.
Yeah.
I want to see the money being used.
The time horizon for public works planning and project development and permitting, often that cycle is longer than 6 years, and that's the primary reason.
Right,
behind
right.
that.
You got me there.
You know, we have a 6-year capital facilities plan. You know, but it's, you know, there's a lot of projects on the list behind that. You know, there's a 20-year plan as well. And so it can take that full 6 years or more to conceive of and deliver a project in today's world.
Does state law say that you have to spend it then in 10 years? There can't be anything left over then?
That's correct.
Right.
This is Commissioner Baker. I had a question for you, Brent, on the hardship, temporary hardship permanent structure in regards to a new dwelling, and the existing dwelling has to be decommissioned or converted dwelling upon cessation of the hardship. Is there any way that could be converted into like an ADU? I know there's different requirements for the size, but could they?
So under current state statute in the rural area,
Yeah.
we can only allow ADUs attached to the primary dwelling. There has some effort in the legislature to change that, but I don't believe it's looking like it's going to be successful this year.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So Brent, I had a question regarding the detached ADUs, and I know you mentioned that now there's going to be no requirement there's not going to be no requirement for the ADU regarding the setback. That's not as strict as, you know, where the home is, and I guess I have a concern there because I feel like that allows people now to, you've got a small lot in the urban growth area, and can you just put an ADU now down right in the middle of that if there is no setback?
Well, there's still a setback, but it's the same setback that applies to any structure on the property. So the base zoning setbacks still apply. What the state statute says is we cannot impose any additional setback requirements on ADUs. If we are going to impose a setback requirement on ADUs, we have to impose it on any structure on that property.
Okay.
Chair, anything?
Okay, so I guess a couple things. The time limit to reduce impact fees. I guess yeah, I share my commissioner's concern here as far as generally the fees are, my understanding is that they're charged based on impact and then what we're going to need to do. So there's some kind of what we're going to need to do to fix for that impact. And I understand the timeline. I guess my heartburn comes from the inflationary effect of those dollars that are collected has a pretty significant diminishing return, especially as we stretch it out to 10 years. I mean, we might only getting 50% of the value on the dollar at that point from when the impact fee was collected. So I guess my caution of this would be that in all haste, as much as possible. And I understand the permitting, because there's other sources of funding. There's a lot of things that go into these things. But oftentimes when we extend our timeline, we take up all of that time that we've extended. And I guess that would be my biggest concern with, approval of extension. Just because sometimes the pressure makes it happen faster. And I think there's better value for the people that are living with those impacts and the dollars that are being spent just from the inflationary costs. The schools, when schools ask for changes in how they calculate, I always kind of perk up a little bit because they're trying to figure out a way they can collect more. And I would really kind of like some clarification on what this is going to allow and not allow, because I've seen school districts do pretty significant gymnastics to try to expand impact fees. And the biggest thing is like when they're not doing an annual review, some school districts have had to come back and reduce their impact fees because they realized that they were overcharging. If a school realizes that they're overcharging, but then doesn't do an annual review, they can push that out another decade without something in a provision in the code saying, no, you're supposed to do this annually. I think Evergreen School District had to reduce theirs significantly because they were overcharging. So I don't know, what's your thoughts on?
Well, so in terms of the traffic impact fees and the time frame, that's outside of my expertise. I'd certainly happy to reach out to the staff in Public Works that can answer that question and get an answer back to the commission before the hearing. We've got a month, so I can certainly get that addressed. And on the school impact fees, I'll need to circle with community planning staff that work with those districts when they do propose their fee updates, and get a response back to you, and potentially consider putting some sort of time frame or some criteria that would speak to that concern.
I got a final thing on the lighting, the new lighting ordinance. I guess the question is, what's the genesis of that? And then there's a couple lines in there that talks about not being able to see the light from the neighboring property. And I didn't understand the definition of like, what does that mean?
Yeah, so this was specifically requested by council members. We had drafted this last fall, and we took it to Deeb, and they weren't opposed to it, but they had a lot of questions. And anyway, in response to that, we proposed removing it from the list. And when we went back to council with our work session in February, they specifically asked us to bring it back. So that's the reason it's here. I don't know. April might be able to speak. She's the one that drafted the language, and she might be able to speak more to your other questions.
Hi, Commissioners. April Firth, Director of Community Development. I took the language from a neighboring jurisdiction. So because of the request and the amount of questions we received were a lot about enforcing the code, and that would be extremely difficult to enforce a lighting code, but it was to prevent lights being shined directly into the neighboring property under new development in the rural areas.
And would that include motion lights and floodlights? Because I look at crime prevention through environmental design. And one of the things, when we look at those kind of elements, lighting actually is a huge factor. Motion lights are a big factor because that's exactly what you want to do is you go from an ambient light to, daylight, kind of scenario.
Yes, but not at 3 o'clock in the morning into your neighbor's bedroom window. And that's what we get. But yes, you want a motion light to be able to prevent crime, but also you want to the point of it was so that you weren't disturbing your neighbors, because we are getting complaints about that exactly.
No,
especially motion lights.
Okay, yeah, and I understood, and I totally appreciate that, and then the shielding and stuff. But I guess the language that was confusing to me was not visible from neighboring adjacent property, and I didn't understand what the bracket was, because lights are always visible from a neighboring property. And so then it gets a real sticky wicket, like versus a shielded light. So we do something that's a very shielded light, it's downward, but you're going to have, there's no looms or loom measurements of what light is. And I think that could be an important clarification from a reasonable, because a reasonable person would go, no, it's fine. Obviously we're going to see lights, but the code says you can't see it from my property line. I'm standing on my property line. I can see my neighbor's light.
Yep, I can reword it
So
to at least say shielded.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
And actually, Oliver is a volunteer to respond to your school impact fee question.
Planning Commission members, for the record, Oliver Jacko, Community Planning Director. I think you asked a very good question, Planning Commissioner Haroon, but all I wanted to add is that we don't require the school districts, as well as some, or the transportation, we are required to have at least 6-year capital facilities plan. And it is through that 6-year, even though some can do 20, it is through that 6-year capital facilities plan that they develop their capital facilities plan inventory and their new needs, and then using the formula to estimate what their impact fee is going to be. In our code, we initially provided them the opportunity to update on an annual basis. However, you will agree that on an annual basis, you don't get any good trends. So we work with them to put that at a 4-year interval. And with, there are about 9 school districts in the county, we staggered it in terms of when they need to update. So it would be a challenge for them to be updating on an annual basis because you don't get a very good trend in 1 year from the next. And as you know, families move around and so forth. So there is no stability in any given school district. For those reasons, the 4 years and the timing of the 6-year capital facilities update makes sense to us, and that's why we move it to 4 years. The formula, is the formula that, you all have looked at it when we come before you to review their submitted capital facilities plan and the associated or the attendant impact fees. Recall that when they go through their process, they have elected school board that reviews the impact fee and the capital facilities plan as submitted or went through them. Some of the school board have been making what I may call a decision either to charge the maximum or some fee that they believe is reasonable. So for those reasons, we leave it to the school district as long as they follow the formula to arrive at the impact fee that they are submitting with their associated capital facilities plan. So they're looking at this, and the same is true. They do hire outside consultant to look at the student factor, the student generation from different housing type. In some cases, and I think what Brent is alluding to, when you're building multifamily, some multifamily may be for all senior citizens, if you will, and likelihood that you will see students coming out of those multifamily is very slim. So that is why they like to rely on student factor coming out of multifamily. So those are some of the variables or factors that they consider in the adjustment that they're asking us that we make.
So just to clarify, by code then, when this goes through, they will be required every 4 years.
Our code currently said every 4 years,
So it doesn't change anything. So it is at least every 4 years.
at least every
Okay.
4 years. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Any other questions or clarifications that we need brought back to us for the hearing? Gentlemen, ladies, thank you very much. Appreciate your time and effort and energy in this evening. And we'll see you here in a month or so. With that said, do we have any other comments from the Planning Commission for this meeting? Not hearing. We will come back at 6:30 for our hearing with Jose.